Where are you watching from today? I never thought I'd be tossed aside by my own daughter. Not like that. Not in silence. And not with him standing behind her, arms crossed, smug like he had won something. But he didn't know, neither of them did, that I still had one move left. One quiet, final, move. And when I played it, the game flipped. This isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. Has something like this ever happened to you? Drop it in the comments. And if this story speaks to you, subscribe, and stay with me. My name's Elaine. I'm 58. Until recently, I believed in unconditional love. You know, the kind of love that sticks, that doesn't vanish just because life gets messy. Especially family. I built everything around mine. My husband. My daughter, Rachel. Every dinner I cooked, every birthday I planned, every penny I saved, it was all for them. When cancer took my husband last year, it was like someone yanked the floor out from under me. But I held on to one thing. Rachel. She was still mine. My reason. So I let go of the house we built together, brick by brick, in a quiet little town, north of Austin. Too many memories. Too many mornings waking up, expecting to hear his voice in the kitchen. Rachel offered me a place to stay. Well. Rachel did. Her husband, Derek, he barely looked up from his phone when I walked through the door with my bags. I told myself to be easy. Invisible. Stayed in the little room at the back. Cooked meals. Scrubbed the counters. Ran errands. Smiled too much. Spoke too little. Tried so hard not to be a burden. But Derek made sure I still felt like one. Always a sigh, a twitch in the jaw, that look, like I was something he just couldn't wait to remove. It started small. If I asked a question, he'd groan. Changed the channel when I was mid-show. Once, I swear I heard him mumble, "Freeloader," while passing me in the hallway. I tried to tell myself I misheard. But I didn't. I knew. Rachel never said anything. I'd look at her, hoping she'd say something, anything. But she always brushed it off. He's just tired. Work's rough right now. And I swallowed it, all of it. Because that's what mothers do, right? But there was one night that broke me. We were at the dinner table. I'd made chicken pot pie, Derek's favorite, not mine. Rachel was glued to her phone. Derek sipping beer, like usual. Silence so loud, it rang. Then, like it was nothing, he looked up and said, "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." Rachel froze. I blinked. What? He shrugged, calm as anything. "How long is this gonna go on? You're not working. You're not helping with bills. We didn't sign up to feed extra mouths." I felt it hit me, right in the gut. Like he'd just taken the air from my lungs. I looked at Rachel. "Please. Say something." She wouldn't even meet my eyes. "Maybe it's best," she whispered, "if you found something more stable. For everyone's sake. Everyone's sake." I didn't scream. Didn't throw a plate. I stood up. Walked down that hallway. And packed 2 suitcases. That's all I had left, from a life I built. I didn't cry while folding clothes. The tears came later, when I stood outside their building, cold wind slicing through my coat, and realized I had nowhere to go. Rachel didn't walk me out. Derek didn't even pretend to care. I sat on the curb for almost an hour. Phone dead. Heart worse. So this is what it feels like, I remember thinking. To be erased. That night, I checked into a cheap motel, one of those places where the walls are thin, and the vending machine swallows your change. I lay there on that creaky bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself how we got here. What did I do so wrong? Why did the people I gave everything to leave me like this? The next morning, I sent Rachel a message. I understand. I love you. Always. No reply. A week later, I tried again. Then again. Birthday reminders. Weather updates. Just something to stay connected. Silence. 3 months passed. Each day stretched longer than the last. I applied for jobs. Anything. But who's going to hire a 58-year-old widow who hasn't worked in over a decade? I thought about house cleaning. Babysitting. But my knees, they're not what they used to be. And the loneliness. It wasn't just heavy. It was suffocating. But worse, the shame. I gave that girl my entire life. And she turned her back on me, like I was a bill she didn't want to pay. One night, while going through a box of old keepsakes, just trying to feel close to something, anything, I found it. My mother's diary. I don't even remember packing it. Maybe I never read it before. Maybe I was never ready. But that night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, and opened the pages. And there it was. A name. A memory. A truth that hit like thunder. I remember my hands shaking. My heart racing. Because in just a few lines, I realized I wasn't just the woman they threw away. I was someone else. Someone they never saw coming. And for the first time in months, I smiled. They thought they left me with nothing. After that night with the diary, time stopped behaving like time. Days melted into each other, soft and gray, like a painting left out in the rain. The motel smelled like burnt plastic and dust. The vending machine outside my door buzzed all night long. That hum became the sound of defeat, my lullaby. I barely spoke. Didn't cry much either. But when I did, it wasn't loud. No sobs. No wailing. Just quiet shaking, breaths I tried to swallow. That kind of crying you do when you know no one's coming. For days later, I sent Rachel a message. Hey. I'm okay. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Nothing. 2 weeks later, just a heart emoji. Still nothing. I told myself she was busy. That Derek must be behind this, that he was poisoning her against me. But deep down, I knew better. Hope turned sour. It started rotting inside me. The money I had from selling the house, it was almost gone. I tried applying everywhere, grocery stores, front desks, even a diner off the freeway. Same responses. Overqualified. Not quite the right fit. Which, let's be honest, is just code for you're too old. You look too tired. And I was. One night, I sat on that sticky motel floor, cross-legged, sorting through the only box that wasn't filled with clothes. Photos. Letters. A couple of ticket stubs I'd saved for no good reason. At the bottom, still wrapped in a Ziploc bag, was that old leather diary. My mother's. I held it for a while. Just stared at the cover. Thought about tossing it back. But something about the way it felt, soft, cracked, familiar, made me open it again. I clicked on the old lamp next to the bed. Dim yellow light filled the room. Her handwriting was still the same, tight loops, always written in pen. Just like those little lunchbox notes she used to slip in when I was a kid. The first pages were normal, weather reports, church gossip, complaints about store prices. But then came one that stopped me cold. June. He came again today, she wrote. He said he wishes it were different. That I could be his wife. But he has a family. A business. A name to protect. Elaine will never know. She must never know. I just pray she understands someday how much I loved her, even if she came from a mistake. From something we shouldn't have done. I read it. Then again. Again. She must never know. My heart caught in my throat. I flipped faster. Pages flew. Hints. Pieces. Hotel rooms. Envelopes of cash. He'd try to give, she'd try not to take. But she was desperate. He never wrote his full name, only his initials, HJS. Then, February. He told me he made arrangements. If something ever happens to him, he'll make sure Elaine gets something. A part of what he built. It won't be through the official estate, it's too risky. But he swore there's a trust. A letter. His lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, knows everything. Goldstein. I felt the breath leave my body. That name. I'd seen it before. It took me 2 days, and a lot of squinting at the motel's shared computer, but I found him. Leonard Goldstein. A retired estate lawyer, still listed under a private office in Dallas. I couldn't bring myself to call. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. So I wrote a letter. An actual, pen-on-paper letter, shaky handwriting and all. I told him who I was, who my mother had been. I begged him for a conversation. Even a response. 2 weeks later, my phone rang. I remember how his voice cracked the moment I mentioned her name. He knew her. Not just on paper. He knew her. I always wondered if you'd reach out someday, he said. There's something here for you. Something you need to see. The next morning, I packed a small bag, and got on a Greyhound to Dallas. Half of me still worried he'd turn out to be some scam artist. The other half? It was already hoping. When I stepped into his office, old wood shelves, the faint smell of paper and dust, I knew I wasn't being tricked. This was real. He walked over and handed me an envelope, yellowed with time, the seal cracked, but still intact. The handwriting? Harold James Sterling. Founder of Sterling Energy, the name you hear on the news. Oil. Money. Legacy. The letter was addressed to my daughter, Elaine Rose. I couldn't even read it all in one sitting. I broke down before I got past the second paragraph. He confessed everything, the affair, the choices, the regret, and the truth he couldn't face while alive. Then the promise. In the event of my death, I have made sure a portion of my private assets, separate from my estate, will be given to you through Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood. And though I never claimed you in life, I claim you now in death. Mr. Goldstein slid a folder toward me. Inside? Bank accounts. An investment portfolio. Ownership titles. Paperwork. Total value? Over $1 million. I stared at the folder. Then at him. Is this real? He nodded. It always was. And just like that, I felt it. A beat. A thump in my chest. A pulse I hadn't felt in months. Not because of the money. But because I felt seen. I had never been chosen for anything in my life. Not really. And now, here I was, no longer a mistake swept under the rug. No longer the discarded mother with 2 suitcases. I sat in that office quietly. Didn't cry. Didn't shout. Just sat. Breathing. Letting it all hit me, like rain after a drought. That night, I returned to my motel. Same ceiling. Same air. Same creaky bed. But something inside me had changed. And for the first time in months, I slept with a smile. They thought they erased me. But I was still here. And now, I had something they never saw coming. I didn't head back to Austin right away. Something in me had shifted, quietly, but permanently. I wasn't just Elaine, the cast-off, the burden. I was someone else now. Someone with answers. Someone with clarity. For the first time in years, the shame wasn't choking me. I could finally breathe. I stayed in Dallas for a few more days, walked down unfamiliar streets with coffee in hand. Watched couples argue on sidewalks. Watched kids kick soccer balls in driveways. People, living lives that didn't have room for betrayal. And for once, I didn't feel envy. I felt curiosity. Who among them was barely holding it together behind those smiles? Who else had been pushed out of their own story, and fought their way back in? That inheritance, the folder full of accounts and assets, it wasn't just money. Leonard Goldstein hadn't just handed me wealth. He gave me time. Time to understand what I was really holding. This wasn't about getting rich. This was about reclaiming something I thought was gone forever. Power. Not over anyone else, over myself. Because when grief mixes with humiliation long enough, it becomes fuel. When I finally returned to Austin, I didn't go back to that motel. I booked a short-term place in a newer part of downtown, clean, quiet, sleek. The kind of apartment Rachel and Derek would never imagine me walking into, let alone affording. I started dressing with intention. Nothing flashy. Just smarter. More polished. I learned how to disappear in a different way, the kind that makes you walk into a room and not get questioned. Then I started learning. I watched hours of YouTube tutorials on investing, commercial real estate, LLC formation, tax loopholes. I studied lease agreements. I Googled city zoning laws. Not because I had some grand empire in mind, but because I swore to myself I would never be at someone else's mercy again. And that's when I found it. Buried deep in a listing on a small-time auction site, a modest apartment building in East Austin. A little neglected. A little weathered. But still strong. Still standing. And the address? It was their building. Rachel and Derek's. I just sat there, staring at the screen, heart pounding so loud. I could barely hear the hum of the fridge behind me. It was listed as distressed. Delinquent on taxes. Auction in 2 weeks. I didn't even blink. Leonard helped me draw up an LLC, quiet, untraceable, anonymous. I moved the funds, submitted the paperwork, and placed the bid. This wasn't about revenge. At least, not entirely. This was about control. They kicked me out of that building like I was trash. I was about to become the one who owned every wall, every pipe, every cracked tile they walked across. The auction came and went. And I won. Legally. Silently. Fully. I remember holding the deed in my hands, and whispering. Let's see how Derek enjoys cutting a rent check to the woman he couldn't wait to be rid of. 30 days later, letters were mailed to every unit. Lease terms were under review. Rents would be adjusted. For Derek and Rachel. Triple the market value, plus overdue fees. I didn't have to be in the room to hear the eruption. He would have shattered a mug. Thrown something against a wall. I could feel it from across the city. Because it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about the loss of control, the shift in power, the humiliation of it. Derek was the kind of man who needed to feel bigger than someone. And I had just pulled the rug out from under him. Rachel called me 2 days after the letters landed. It was the first time I'd heard her voice, since I stood outside their building in the cold with no place to go. I let it go to voicemail. Mom. I don't know if you heard, but something weird's happening. Our rent just jumped. Like, massively. Derek's freaking out. I don't know what's going on. Can we talk? I didn't respond. Because this wasn't about retaliation. It was about gravity. About consequences, finally catching up to people who never thought they'd have to answer for anything. A few nights later, I drove past the complex. Their windows were lit. Curtains drawn. Shadows pacing. I saw Rachel's silhouette, restless. Derek's, animated, angry. I parked across the street for maybe 60 seconds, just long enough to know they were unraveling. Then I drove away. Did it hurt? Of course it did. A part of me still ached. Because if I'm honest, I didn't want back in the apartment. I wanted back into my daughter's heart. But that wasn't possible. Not yet. So I stayed quiet. And waited. Because sometimes, the most powerful move isn't noise. It's patience. 3 weeks later, I saw her. I was at the grocery store. She was 2 aisles over, standing behind a rack of sale cereal boxes. She didn't see me. Her hair was tied up messy, not the stylish kind. The "I've been crying for 2 days" kind. Her cart was light. Just essentials. Store-brand cans. Generic rice. I should have turned and left. But I didn't. I followed her, from a distance. Watched her stare at a box of mac and cheese. Read something on her phone. Maybe a message from him. Then she sighed, and put it back on the shelf. That's what broke me. Not because she looked tired. But because I remembered the little girl, who used to cry for me when she scraped her knees. The one who made me check for monsters under the bed, even when I was too tired to stand. And now, she was living with one. I went home. Sat on the couch, in silence, for hours. No TV. No lights. Just sat. And let it sink in. This wasn't punishment. It was what happens when choices circle back. This was consequence. And consequence had been knocking, for a long time. I had a plan. Not for revenge. But for quiet, intentional reclamation. Every step, precise. Every move, part of something bigger. With the LLC fully in place, and the deed in my name, I started repairing the building. Quietly. Broken light in the hallway? Fixed. Leaks under the stairwell? Sealed. Rusty locks? Replaced. Derek didn't notice. He was too busy sending rage-filled emails to the property manager, demanding answers. But I knew him. He wasn't going anywhere. Leaving would mean defeat. And his pride wouldn't let that happen. Rachel? She followed his lead, like always. So I kept going. I changed the signage. Installed a new security camera near the lobby. Upgraded the tenant mailboxes. All under the name of my new company. ER Holdings. Short for Elaine Rose. No one knew who was behind it. Then came the inspection notices. Annual. Mandatory. Derek's response? Explosive. He sent a nasty message through the tenant portal, filled with empty threats and dramatic outrage. I read it 3 times. Then smiled. He was coming apart. And I hadn't even lifted a finger. While he unraveled. I was becoming someone I barely recognized. I started wearing my hair in a sleek twist. Sharp blazer. Clean heels. A bag that didn't say, broken. It said, deliberate. I walked differently now. Straight spine, eyes forward, no more looking down. I even began attending small business meetups under a fake name. Learning from people who had been in the game longer than me. Real estate agents, investment advisors, property developers. No one asked where I came from. They saw a quiet woman, confident, cash in hand, with a sharp eye and sharper silence. That's the thing about reinvention, the best disguise is the truth you choose not to explain. Then one morning, it happened. I had just walked out of a tenant meeting, documents clutched to my chest, sunglasses on, hair tucked back. When I spotted them in the parking lot. Rachel. Derek. They were just a few feet away. Rachel glanced at me, and looked right past. Derek didn't even blink. Didn't register me at all. Later that night, I sat on my balcony, mug of tea in hand, and a whisper of a smile. Imagining the irony. Walking past your own daughter, completely invisible. Not because you're weak, but because you've grown into someone she doesn't recognize. They couldn't see me anymore. Because they only remembered the version of me they once controlled. And that woman, she's long gone. The calls from Rachel kept coming. Soft, tentative, hesitant voicemails. Hey, Mom. I was just hoping you might have time to talk. I know things are complicated. I didn't return them. Not because I wanted to hurt her. But because I needed her to feel what she left behind. Every time my resolve started to shake, I opened my mother's diary. That same line echoing through the pages. Elaine must never know. But I did know now. And that knowledge had turned into armor. Untouchable. Silent. Steel. I wasn't the woman begging to be tolerated under their roof. I was the one who owned it. See, I never believed revenge was about revenge. It wasn't rage. It was recalibration. Balance, without fire. A correction, not a war. But when I read Derek's email response, after he got the rent increase notice, a flicker of satisfaction, I won't lie, burned in me. Subject, rent increase. This is absolutely unacceptable. It must be a mistake. Tripling our rent? That's extortion. I demand to speak to whoever owns this dump. We've lived here for 3 years and never missed a single payment. This is robbery. Derek M. Reeves. As if signing it like a badge of honor made it mean more. I read it slowly, 3 times. Then forwarded it to my property manager with a short note. Please refer to Clause C in the lease agreement. No exceptions. He wasn't just angry, he was stunned. Because in his mind, no one should have the power to corner him. That was the weakness in him. He never imagined a day when he'd have to answer to someone he couldn't see, couldn't intimidate. Rachel called again that night. This time, no act. No careful wording. Mom, I know you're not answering, but I really need to talk to you. Things are bad. Derek's not himself. He's angry. At everything. We're trying to fix things. I don't know. I miss you. I do. Her voice cracked. I sat there, holding the phone. My thumb hovered over the call button. I could have answered. Could have said, it's okay. Could have offered a lifeline, again. But I didn't. Because it wasn't okay. And I couldn't keep patching holes in a roof she helped burn down. She let him toss me out, like I was some overdue bill. And now that the pressure was on her, she remembered how to dial my number. Let her sit in the silence, for a while. Let her learn what it feels like. The following week, I signed off on more property upgrades. Fresh paint on the exterior. New hallway lights. Some landscaping out front. All paid for by his inflated rent. The irony? Everyone else in the building was benefiting from Derek's tantrum. But he couldn't see that. He thought he was being targeted. He started sliding notes under the property office door. Water pressure's garbage. Trash hasn't been picked up fast enough. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke. Each one went unanswered. Rachel stopped leaving voicemails. She began texting instead. Short ones. Hey. Can we talk? I really need you. Then, nothing again. Meanwhile, I watched the monthly reports roll in. ER Holdings was running smooth. Profitable. Quiet. Most tenants paid on time. Stayed out of trouble. It was only Derek making noise, and Rachel, caught in the wreckage of his pride. Things shifted again, when I got the quarterly report. Attached to it were photos of their unit. Mildew in the bathroom. Tiles cracked in the kitchen. Mail spilling onto the floor, like nobody had touched it in weeks. They were slipping. Not just financially, emotionally. Internally. Living lean. Living small. Living cornered. I didn't feel pity. I felt understanding. This wasn't about a rent check. It was about power. And Derek was bleeding it out in buckets. Rumors started floating through the building. He'd picked up more hours at work. Rachel had been spotted crying alone on the back steps, by more than one tenant. They were falling apart from the inside. And I didn't have to lift a finger. That's what I kept holding on to. Because for so long, I was the one begging Rachel to see the truth. To see who Derek really was. To see what she was turning into, just by staying next to him. Now, they were suffocating on silence. And I was watching from above. Literally. My new place? Different building. Top floor. Balcony view, right into their courtyard. I didn't stare out the window all day. Just enough. Just enough to remind myself. I wasn't crazy. That I didn't imagine the cruelty. That the betrayal wasn't just in my head. And still. Some nights, I sat by that window. Holding my phone. Staring at her last text. I really need you. And something inside me cracked. Not completely. Just a small shift. Because the mother in me. She still ached. But the woman I'd become? She knew better now. She knew. This was only the beginning. I used to think heartbreak sounded like shouting. Doors slamming. Dishes breaking. Public meltdowns in the middle of parking lots. But real heartbreak? It's quieter than that. It's a voicemail you don't return. A message you don't answer. It's the empty space between you and the child who once called you, Mommy. Eventually, Rachel stopped calling. The text slowed to a trickle. But on her end, the damage was piling up. Word from the staff was that their unit had turned tense, toxic, hostile. Derek had started snapping at everyone. Refusing basic maintenance. Filing unnecessary inspection requests. Looking for someone, anyone, to blame. And Rachel? They said she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Eyes hollow. Shoulders always tense. But no, I didn't gloat. I didn't pour a glass of wine and call it karma. This wasn't about watching them fall apart. It was something deeper. Something sadder. It was watching the girl I raised stay in a cage, and call it love. Then, one afternoon, my property manager emailed me after a noise complaint. The neighbor below their unit had reported yelling, loud, angry yelling. Glass breaking. A man shouting something about losing control, and this is all your fault. Derek had stormed out and didn't return until morning. Rachel stayed locked in. Curtains drawn. Lights off. I waited. Not for him. For her. 2 days. 2 long, quiet, aching days. Then, just as the sun was brushing gold across the skyline, my intercom buzzed. Hi, this is Rachel Reeves. I was wondering if Elaine, my mom, lives here? My chest tightened. I didn't move right away. Just stared at the screen, frozen. Then, I pressed the button to let her in. 10 minutes later, she knocked. When I opened the door, she stood there, barely herself. Pale. Hair limp. Makeup smudged under her eyes, like yesterday's tears hadn't fully dried. Her clothes were wrinkled, like she hadn't even looked in the mirror before leaving. She looked 20 years older than the last time I saw her. We stared at each other for a moment, that felt like an hour. Then she whispered, "Hi, Mom." I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. No words. Just the soft clink of teacups, as I prepared 2 mugs. I didn't ask why she came. Didn't ask how she was. Didn't ask anything at all. I just handed her the tea, sat down across from her, and waited. I don't know where to start, she finally said, her voice barely above breath. I stayed quiet. She looked down at the cup in her hands. Derek, he's not easy. He's angry all the time. He blames everything, the rent, me, the dog barking next door. Still, I said nothing. I thought we were doing the right thing, when we told you to leave. Told me to leave? As if I had a choice. I didn't want more conflict. I thought it would keep things calm. Derek said, he said you'd never leave unless we pushed you. She swallowed. And God, I hate myself for agreeing. I took a slow sip of tea. She lowered her voice. I miss you. But I don't know how to fix this. I looked at her. Every twitch in her cheek. Every shadow under her eyes. She wasn't asking outright. But she wanted forgiveness. And she didn't know how to ask for it. So I gave her the only thing I could. Silence. Because sometimes, silence is safer than the truth. We sat like that for almost an hour. She didn't ask for money. Didn't beg for help. She just wanted to sit with me. And I let her. When she finally stood to leave, she paused, then reached for my hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. For everything. I didn't say it back. But I held her hand, longer than she expected. She pulled away first. Tears pooled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She walked to the door. Opened it. And left. I didn't cry. But the second the door clicked shut behind her, I sank into my chair. Still holding her teacup, like it was some kind of lifeline. She had come. She had looked me in the eye. The cracks. They were finally beginning to show. Here's what I've learned about real power. It doesn't scream. It doesn't slam things, or pound fists. It whispers. It shifts, quietly. You pull a string here. Close a door there. And suddenly, the people who wrote you off start to squirm. And Derek? He was squirming. I contacted my lawyer that morning. Told him to reach out to building security. Make everything legal, quiet, undeniable. Within days, we had new surveillance in place. Nothing invasive. Just standard cameras. Nothing Derek could scream about without outing himself. But more importantly, I made sure the other tenants were safe. The building wouldn't suffer because one man couldn't manage the storm he created. And Rachel? She didn't call again. But I heard things. Through the building manager, whispers floated back to me. She'd been walking to work. The car was gone. The power in their unit shut off by 9 p.m. most nights. No heat during the coldest stretch of the month. The cracks weren't just in their relationship anymore. They were in the structure of their lives. And still, I stayed away. Because this was never about punishment. It wasn't even about vengeance anymore. It was about closure. Letting Derek's world shrink until he had no one left to bark at. But his own reflection. And letting Rachel decide for herself. Would she keep clinging to the cage? Or finally reach for the key I'd been leaving open, right in front of her? I knew she wasn't there yet. But the walls? They were closing in. And secrets, real ones, don't stay buried forever. They leak through cracks. I didn't expect the knock that night. The air had been still for days. No complaints from staff, no angry voicemails, no mysterious threats in jagged handwriting. Just silence. The kind that feels like thunder, waiting behind the clouds. But then, a knock. Soft. Hesitant. And something in my chest tightened. I opened the door slowly. There she stood. Soaked from the rain, hair matted to her cheeks. Grocery bag clutched to her chest like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. Eyes red. Face pale. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Like the words had dried up long before she reached my door. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside. She walked in slow. Each step soggy, dripping on the hardwood. I handed her a towel. She took it, without looking at me. I turned to the stove. Filled the kettle. 2 mugs. Chamomile. No questions. No explanations. She sat stiffly at the edge of the couch. Like she was a guest in a house she used to own. Like she didn't believe she deserved to stay long. And maybe she didn't. Her eyes stayed fixed on the cup in her hands. "He's not the man I thought he was," she said finally. I stayed quiet. I mean, maybe I always knew. Somewhere inside. But I kept blaming it on stress, work, pressure. Told myself if I waited long enough, he'd come back to the version I fell for. Still, I said nothing. She looked up at me, voice low, trembling. "He's convinced we're being targeted. Obsessed. He checks my phone. My email. Last week, he followed me to work. Stood outside for an hour, then accused me of hiding something." She paused. Looked away. A shiver ran through her, and not from the rain. "He asked if you were hiding something. If we were working together." That caught me off guard. A short, sharp inhale. But I held it. She didn't wait for a reply. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you. That I didn't even know where you lived." Another pause. "But that wasn't true." I met her eyes then. "I figured it out," she said softly. "Your building came up in a security notice. Same management company." I put it together. Wasn't hard. Of course it wasn't. Rachel had always been smart. Just not always brave. Now, though, she looked like someone who'd finally seen the monster in the room. And realized she'd been feeding it. "I haven't said anything," she added. "Not yet. I miss you." Her voice cracked. "But I don't even know how to be around you anymore." My hand gripped the mug tighter. Then she said it. "You left. And I let you. I let him push you out." That was when I spoke. "No, Rachel. You didn't let him. You stood with him." She froze. Didn't try to deny it. Just blinked, mouth parted, like maybe she was going to defend herself. But nothing came. There was nothing left to defend. I stood and walked to the window. Stared into the night. "I begged for one word that night," I whispered. "Just one. And you. You stayed silent." Behind me, I heard her exhale, a broken, quiet sound. "I didn't think it would get this bad," she said. "I thought I could manage him." "You don't manage men like that," I said softly. "You survive them. Or you leave them." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. We sat like that for a long while. 2 women, same blood, same ache. But oceans apart. And maybe that's how it would stay. Maybe not. Eventually, she stood. Set her mug down, like it was fragile, something sacred. Her eyes were glassy, rimmed red, holding back tears that hadn't been given permission yet. "I'm not here for forgiveness," she said quietly. I wanted to feel safe again. Even just for a minute. I walked her to the door. She paused at the threshold. Then, suddenly, she turned and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't move at first. Then, slowly, I lifted my arms too. Returned the hug. But gently. Like I was trying to hold a memory I wasn't sure I could trust. When she pulled away, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me one last time, then left. And as the door clicked behind her, something shifted. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, The beginning of something that could one day grow into it. If she let it. The email invitation was sent on a quiet Tuesday morning. No big headlines. No drama. Just a clean, professional subject line. Tenant meeting, renovation update. Common room. Next week. Attendance required. Questions welcome. I didn't need to wonder if Derek would show. I knew he would. He wouldn't be able to resist. He needed a face. A body. Someone to point at, and blame. He had no idea he'd be walking straight into the hands of the woman he tossed aside, like garbage. The day of the meeting, I arrived before everyone else. Charcoal blazer. Dark denim. Simple, intentional, powerful in its understatement. My hair was loose that day, waves just brushing my shoulders. Not sleek. Not restrained. Just, quietly free. No one who saw me that day would have recognized the woman who once stood in Rachel's kitchen, begging to be seen. One by one, tenants began trickling in. Some bored. Some annoyed. Some actually curious. And then, there he was. Derek stormed in like he owned the room. That same smug swagger. Rachel followed behind him, like a shadow clinging to his anger. He didn't look around. Didn't notice me. Went straight to the property manager, like a man itching for a fight. Where is she? I want to talk to whoever's in charge. The manager didn't flinch. All questions will be addressed during the presentation. Derek scoffed. Rachel looked at her shoes. I sat in the back corner, calm, still, unbothered. The presentation began. Basic announcements. Updates on renovations. New security systems. New insulation. Landscaping improvements. All routine. All smart. All funded, in part, by the very rent Derek had screamed about for months. Then the property manager paused. Cleared his throat. We'd like to thank ER Holdings for their leadership in these improvements. The owner is here today, should anyone have questions. I stood up. Heads turned. My heels tapped softly on the tiled floor as I made my way to the front. Each step like a silent drumbeat in my chest. Derek's face shifted from confusion to horror. Rachel's mouth dropped open. I turned to face the room. Good evening, I said. My name is Elaine. I own this building. The silence was thick enough to hold in your hands. Derek leapt to his feet, knocking his chair back. You? You've got to be kidding me. This is some kind of sick joke. I looked him in the eyes. Really looked. And what I saw wasn't power. It was panic. Sweat collecting at his collar. Redness creeping up his neck. Eyes darting. Jaw clenched. No game, I replied softly. Just business. He took a step toward me. You planned this. You've been manipulating everything. You raised our rent. You're trying to destroy us. I didn't move. I gave you a roof. I fixed what was broken. I treated every tenant fairly. I let the next part land like a soft punch. What I didn't do was forget. He opened his mouth, ready to erupt. But I turned to the tenants instead. If anyone has questions, I'll be available after the meeting. Thank you. And I stepped aside. The meeting continued. But the air? It never settled. Derek didn't sit. Just stood, fists clenched, vibrating with fury. Rachel remained seated, hands clutched in her lap, eyes glassy, staring at nothing. When the meeting finally ended, people came up to me one by one. Some curious. Some grateful. A few surprised. Most had no idea. Derek waited. Waited until the last tenant left the room. Then, he marched right toward me. You think you've won, he hissed. But this? This is just the beginning. You've made the wrong enemy. I stared at him, calm. Unmoved. No, Derek. I didn't make anything. You did, the day you looked me in the eye, and acted like I didn't exist. And then. Rachel stepped forward. Right between us. Derek, stop. He turned, blinking. What did you say? I said stop. This time louder. Stronger. She's not your enemy. She never was. Her voice trembled. You are. He looked like she'd slapped him across the face. Rachel turned to me. I didn't know, she said quietly. About the building. About the money. About any of it. I nodded once. I know. Why didn't you tell me? Because hearing something isn't the same as seeing it. She blinked, holding back tears. Derek laughed bitterly. You two deserve each other. I turned toward him slowly. No, I said. She deserves better. Then I walked away. And for the first time, since the night they pushed me out with 2 suitcases and a closed door, I didn't feel broken. Or angry. Or small. I felt powerful. Quietly. Steadily. Absolutely. 4 days later, she came back. Rachel. At my door. But this time, she was holding something. The second I saw it, my knees nearly gave out. A book. Faded brown leather. Corner worn thin. Spine barely intact. My mother's diary. I opened the door, without saying a word. Rachel stepped inside, eyes wide, voice shaking. I found it, in my closet. You must have left it when you visited. She placed it gently on the coffee table, like it was sacred. And to me, it was. I read it, she said quietly. My heart stopped, for a second. I wasn't trying to snoop. I recognized her handwriting. I needed something that made sense. We stood in silence. A silence that felt heavier than anything either of us had ever said. I didn't know about Mr. Jennings. Or the money. Or any of it. I nodded slowly. I didn't either. Not until there was nothing left, but the truth. Her voice cracked. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you had nothing? I looked into her eyes. For once, she didn't look away. Because I didn't. Not then. That night, when you closed the door. I had no plan. No money. Not even a place to cry, where someone wouldn't tell me to keep it down. Rachel winced. I found the diary when I hit bottom. I was counting coins to buy dinner. Hadn't spoken to a soul in days. Reading it didn't just remind me of who I was. It told me I still mattered. That your grandmother loved me, even if she could never show it. She sat down, hands shaking in her lap. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could turn her back like that. I walked to the window. Watched the street below, the slow hum of life passing by. You didn't become her overnight, I said softly. It was little decisions. Letting small things go. Choosing peace over honesty. Confusing loyalty with love. She walked over. Stood beside me. I left him. The words knocked the breath out of me. He tried to go through my things again, my computer, my bag. I told him no. He exploded. Packed his stuff. Said he'd be back. I changed the locks the next morning. I turned toward her, stunned. I don't know who I am without him, she admitted. But I'd rather figure that out than keep fading away. We stood in silence. All the things we had never said, hovering between us. Then she looked down at the diary. You didn't deserve what I did. What we did. I can't fix the past. But I want to try. I sat beside her. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just, close. I used to dream about hearing that, I said. But hearing it now, it doesn't fix everything. She looked confused. I reached for her hand. It rewrites it. She didn't answer. She just nodded. And we sat there. Not as mother and daughter, not yet. But as two women holding the truth in their hands. And finally, choosing to sit with it. Before she left that night, Rachel paused in the doorway. She didn't fidget. She didn't cry. She just looked at me and said softly, "You didn't raise me to be weak. I just forgot how strong you were." I smiled gently. "No, sweetheart. You didn't forget. You just stopped seeing." And now, she finally was. Not just seeing who I had become, but who I had always been. A few days later, an email popped into my inbox. Subject line, "We need to talk. Now." I hesitated before opening it. Just reading his name, Derek, made my stomach knot. But I opened it anyway. His message? Sharp. Panicked. Drenched in venom. "I know everything, about the building, the inheritance, your little secret with Jennings. You think you're clever? Think you can destroy my life and walk away smiling? Here's the truth, if you don't undo this, I'm going to the press. Your name. Your mother's affair. All of it. Let's see how your precious image holds up once the world knows what kind of family you really come from." I stared at the screen. Not scared. Not even angry. Just steady. Because I'd been ready for this moment since the day I bought the building. I forwarded the email to my lawyer, no message needed. By the next morning, Derek had a cease and desist letter in his inbox. Enclosed. Screenshots of every threatening message he'd sent to the property manager. Evidence of falsified legal filings. A digital trail of tampered emails, all traced neatly back to his IP address. There were also maintenance sabotage reports. Tenant complaints. Even recordings of his outbursts, captured from the building lobby's security feed. We didn't need to press criminal charges. Just one well-aimed defamation and harassment case was enough. And I knew it landed. Because 2 days later, Rachel called. "He's gone," she said quietly. "Packed up while I was at work. Left a note saying he was being hunted. Said you ruined his life." I let a breath out slowly. "No," I said. "He did that all by himself." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry. Again. For thinking he ever deserved my silence." "You were afraid," I told her. "I know what that's like. Fear makes you small, but you don't have to stay that way." He didn't go quietly, of course. Derek posted vague, ranting updates online, filled with shadows and bitterness. Accusations without names. Threats without teeth. He didn't dare say too much. Not after my attorney sent a second letter. One more word, one more insinuation, and we'd press charges. He went quiet after that. At least publicly. But I knew. He'd never forget the day the woman he kicked out now held the deed to his front door. The lease under his name. The keys to the locks he once slammed in my face. And Rachel? She started changing too. Within a month, she moved out of the building. Got a tiny apartment closer to her job. Started therapy. Joined an art class at the community center. She even brought me a painting one day. An abstract phoenix, deep reds and glowing gold. I hung it above the fireplace. We didn't talk every day. But when we did, it was real. Honest. No more pretending. Then came a letter, not an email. Old-fashioned, cream-colored envelope. From Mr. Goldberg. "Congratulations, Elaine," it read. "The property has been fully transferred. All tenant agreements finalized. The lawsuit against Mr. Harrington has been resolved in your favor. You now have complete control, to sell, hold, or rebuild. I held the letter to my chest. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was carrying the past. I felt like I was finally done with it. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. I was ready to close the final chapter. Not in pain. Not in fear. But in peace. I sold the building that spring. The final signature inked on a cloudless Tuesday. No ceremony. No press. No applause. Just a quiet click of a pen. A strong handshake. And the release of 3 years' worth of grief, betrayal, and buried rage. The money arrived in my account the following day. But I didn't toast. Didn't celebrate. I wrote a check. A large one. Half of what I earned went straight to a local women's shelter. The kind of place I wished I'd known about the night I stood on that curb, with no home and no plan. I asked them to name a new wing after my mother. The Evelyn House. It was my way of honoring the woman who stayed silent, but never gave up on me. Who passed down her strength, not in words, but in spirit. The other half? I used it to buy a home. Not a mansion. Not a showpiece. Just a modest 2-bedroom cottage, on the street where I grew up in Cedar Hill. Oak trees out front. A porch swing that creaked when the wind blew. A garden patch that hadn't bloomed in years, but I was ready to change that. Rachel helped me move. We didn't talk much while we packed. We didn't need to. After everything was unloaded, she sat beside me on the porch swing. Legs tucked under her. Eyes scanning the street like she was searching for the girl she used to be. I remember riding my bike here, she whispered. Before everything got complicated. I nodded. You were always safe here. She let the word sit. Then, so quietly I barely heard her. I forgot how that felt. We didn't talk about Derek. There was no need. His story ended with no final scene. Just silence. He'd faded into another city. Another job. Another version of the same lie. Before disappearing, he signed a non-disclosure agreement. Dropped his threats. Walked away with nothing but the weight of what he lost. He became a ghost. Rachel stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese and tomato soup. Just like when she was 10 and tried to flip the sandwich with a fork. She burned one side again. Blamed the pan. I laughed so hard. I nearly cried. It was the first time either of us had laughed like that in years. After she left, I stood by the front window. Tea in my hands. Moonlight curling across the lawn, like soft music. And then, without warning, I said it. Out loud. I forgive you. But not to her. To myself. Because that was the hardest part, wasn't it? Not the standing back up. But realizing. I had never been the ashes. I was the spark all along. They taught me silence was weakness. But I turned it into armor. They tried to write me out. But I became the part of the story they could never erase. I sat down on the couch. Pulled my mother's diary from the drawer. Opened it one last time. And slipped a note inside, folded neatly, waiting for Rachel to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth. And to never, ever forget who you are. The clock ticked softly in the background. My tea grew cold. But my heart? It was finally warm. I didn't need applause. Didn't need a spotlight. I just needed to live the truth. And now, at last, I was home.